Well, as you can see, I have quite a few horseshoes that I ordered off of eBay, so you can expect more horseshoe projects on my channel. For this particular channel, I'm doing a horseshoe hook, and I plan on polishing the metal to a fairly reflective finish. It, so I've got two horseshoes that I've selected out of the bunch to use for this project that are pretty straight, but as you can see, there's some bend in the toes because these were actually on horses. So this metal is it's very soft, so it's easy to bend back straight, and you can do that without having to heat it up. I just hitting it here on the anvil with a 3-pound hammer, and it was pretty straightforward to get to a straight. You could even put it in the vise and probably force it straight. The wire brush I'm using on the angle grinder to take off the rust and dirt, and you see the back is pretty caked on there with dirt. The wire brush gets it to where I can actually see if I have any damage. Now the 120 grit is what I'm using now, flap disc to to begin the polishing process and bringing the metal to a more even finish. Once I've gone over the whole piece, went over it with a 220 grit orbital sander to bring it to a smoother quality or smoother finish. It's pretty fine, and it's about the finest sandpaper I have for a power tool. There's the finish after the 220, and you can see it's relatively smooth. But for the next step, I decided to do the 320 fine sanding block, and the other thing about this is it kind of evens out the scratch marks and puts them all in the same direction. At least that's what I'm trying to do. And you can see the difference there. It's a lot more shiny. So at this point it's ready for the buffer. And I start out the buffing process with the black compound, which is the most aggressive and on the hard wheel side. I ran over the piece. One horseshoe I polished both sides, and the other one just the one side because the back will be against the wall. I moved on to the white compound, which buffs it out a little smoother, and I remove the excess compound before I switch, because I don't skimp on the compound. I put quite a bit. I want to make sure that enough compounds on the metal that is actually buffing the metal out. And there you can see I have it's quite a bit, and that's what I'm trying to show. So I have to remove all that before continuing on. So in order to cut the angle of the hook correctly, or to my liking, I drew a line on the bench there, and kind of just seeing how the hook would be in relation to 90 degrees or against the wall. So once I was satisfied with where the hook would be, I drew the line where I would cut it. And I'm using the cutoff wheel on the angle grinder. And I took my time and really wanted to do a clean, straight cut. And like I said, this metal's so soft, it goes through very smoothly. The file brought it flat from the little bumps that I did have on there. Not that it matters too much, because I'm going to weld it straight or weld in the gaps there, because it's a curved surface. I had to prop up the magnet, the right angle magnet, so it would sit at the right angle, because it was sticking to the welding table and pulling the hook a little crooked. Here I'm welding it with 6011 rod, which is a deep penetrating rod, which I felt was appropriate to get good penetration and in welding this together, because I want it strong. I took the die grinder to flatten out the weld, and I want this for aesthetics, so I did die grind it, and I took the file to it because I want it to have a nice smooth shape. And then I basically repeated the same process with the 120 flap disc, then the 220 orbital sander, and this is taking it back to being ready for the buffer. I only had to do that in the corners where the weld had got on, or where I had welded and the die grinder had made some marks. But it went pretty quick, so I was still happy with the decision of polishing it first, because I thought it would be easier to do with two pieces than after the finished welding the project together and trying to get it polished all the way around. There you see the back is unfinished, but I got a good reflective surface. So I continued from the line I drew earlier and drew with the square another right angle, so I could line up the horseshoe so it will look straight on the wall. Now I'm measuring about 1/3 of the way down and drawing a line across to mark holes where I will drill, and then these holes will be for screws to mount to the wall, and I'm marking center of each side of the horseshoe. And then punching the metal so that when I drill the hole, it will be centered correctly, which you always hope for in metal. So punching a hole is definitely worth taking the time to do. This is a cobalt drill bit. Cobalt works fantastic when you're drilling metal. It's much better than a metal and wood combo type of bit. I really recommend cobalt bits. Here I'm drilling out a bigger hole for countersinking the wood screws that I'm going to use to mount this. I decided to clear coat, and I was really pleased with this clear coat. It went on very smooth and it dried very smooth, and it did not take away from the reflectiveness, and the protection is definitely needed. Here's a demonstration of the countersink and what the screws will actually look like. Here's the finished horseshoe hook mounted on the wall with 2 wood screws. We're going to test the functionality of it. First, we're going to start with a hackamore. Next up, a bridle. You might have a lariat laying around. Hang that up there too. My trusty old shop apron. Shepherd's crook. Bib overalls for those of you who live in the cold areas. Got my welding coat. Trusty old hoodie. And working coat. I'd say that's pretty functional horseshoe hook. I'd even call it a horseshoe utility hook. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would please subscribe to my channel, give me a like, and leave a comment. Thank you.